Master has placed you in a dreadfully precarious position.
Dungeon Master and Dwarven Sword Master, hobgoblins, dwarves, elves, and halflings are some of the characters and terms used in this very complicated and controversial game.
You're playing the most phenomenal game ever created.
What's up, everyone? Let everyone kind of get in here a little bit. I didn't. I'm a bit frazzled right now. I just came in from lifting, so I'm a little. I'm a little. I gotta change mindsets here.
Yeah.
Thank you, my ear trumpet. Appreciate your generosity as always. He's always awesome.
Yeah.
Giving people memberships, and hopefully they stick around after they see if they like it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't really have that big of guns, though. He's got some. There you go.
There you go. No, I live books and babies all day. Look at this one dwarf, summer 25. Yeah.
I mean, you've got actual guns.
I do have actual guns.
Yeah.
It's true.
And also an axe to grind. No, that's not my
I got to get back through going through Adventure Conquer King because I got to, first of all, let people know that I don't hate the game. And then secondly, it's just a massive thing to get through. But digress. We were chatting before the show. We got a little distracted. We're chatting right now. I'm joined by Viktor, per usual. We got Critical Dom on. Dominic Martyne. And
Martyne, just like the Gabriel
Martyne.
Iglesias
Sorry,
yep.
I knew that. There's a Y in there. I'm just an idiot.
That was really funny. I was a substitute for a while, and the kids started doing that bit, and I didn't know what it was. It's like, why are you saying it like that? oh, okay. This is really funny.
But we're joined by Dominic, who you're in the process of writing. What I perceive from you is maybe like what Vic and I perceive when we see games, like what I did with Atomic Punk, where it's sort of like you look out there and you see, I'm not happy with what I see out here in this one like niche within this one area, this one field. So I'm going to make something for it that I like. Vic's done that. I've done that. You're doing that with historical books in regards to D&D, and you're going to actually kickstart the printing of this book. So I guess we'll just dive right in. And first of all, I guess tell the audience a bit about, what your goals are for the book. I have the video here queued up. If you want to play the video first, maybe, I don't know. But it's your project, and I want to, highlight it because I do think it's something that we need. We've seen over the past few years with like John Peterson and what's that? Is it Ben Riggs? Is that the other guy?
Ben Riggs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where there's this sort of this attempt at journalism, I would say, and I use that in a pejorative manner in regards to rewriting history as opposed to just
editorializing, I think it's called. Yeah, when they try to shoot on their own opinions in there.
Despite saying I'm not going to editorialize, I've got the book right here, guys.
Yeah.
Father's Day weekend should have been awesome, but like an idiot, I decided I was going to look at this book again, and that was instead of reading the Judge's Journal. So let's start it off like this. So last year we've got 2024 50th anniversary, absolute shit show, and things do not go well at all for the hobby. Doesn't go well for Wizards of the Coast. And at this stage, they just had a couple more people get canned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who were working for Wizards of the Coast. So when your developers are out, when your community guys are out, and I think they lost their vice president of marketing or something like that. I think it's rather clear that they have failed on almost every account.
Didn't their CEO, did you already say that? I'm sorry. Didn't their CEO change out too?
There was a change at some point because it was the Microsoft lady, I think.
Yeah, but she's not there anymore. She's out now. So
because she was supposed to lead the monetization, and because the VTT is no longer going to be there, because for whatever reason, they can't complete a damn thing. Because it's supposed to be this overarching, entire, big, single project, and yet they can't deliver. They don't actually follow through. So, from my perspective, starting last December, because you've done that video, read this. I started reading a ton of books, gather that stuff, and I've just been going through the timeline, what people are saying, what is knowable, what is maybe implied by a primary source, and trying to come up with my own take on things. And I was talking about this a little bit on the Gilded server within the last couple of days. Since December, I've read probably thousands of pages just to kind of come around to the position that Gygax kind of tells it right in his intro to the original D&D, where it's about the Castle and Crusade Society and about how ideas come off from there, the role of chainmail, which is rather important, and then how the genre was created by Dave Arneson. And it's actually rather straightforward to me so far. But what I'm going to have to do with this book is address point by point what Peterson says, in some cases what Riggs says. Although Riggs has a particular online persona, it's also worth noting that that doesn't really leak into the book Slaying the Dragon, unless you want to take Riggs to task for, their characterization of Lorraine and their position on her. But the book is actually not bad because it makes you stop and think for a second. Okay, all of these D&D settings that people like come out under her leadership. So is that a mitigating circumstance? Probably. I got to be honest. So what we can do at this stage, go ahead and play the video, and then we can see what springboards off of that. And if nothing else, I can just get into random selection of what I've been working on.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, let's play the video. Get it going here.
Have been one of gold and glory.
Oh, let's restart it. Sorry, I didn't know it would. I didn't know it would pick up where we left off when we were testing the video.
Right.
The 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons should have been one of gold and glory. Rather than a celebration of the whole history of the hobby, we get books insulting and belittling the founders on whose shoulders they have made fortunes. Instead of limited reprints of old editions, we got Jack. And considering that the developers are now out at Wizards of the Coast, the whole 2024 plan seems to have flopped. But they are in disarray and disordered. Now is the time to rally to Gary Gygax's banner and to put before the whole hobby a book that perhaps is the one we should have gotten. D&D has always been a war game, and so we began in 1824 with Prussia and Kriegspiel. We'll consider Strategos and other games as they develop until we get to the post-war period and Avalon Hill, particularly their game Gettysburg and its effects on two men, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Since wargaming is simulating being a general, it is therefore role-playing, and not just the province of that later genre. John Peters is an idiot for complaining that someone has to play Germany or the Confederacy. It's a game. Come on. Certain trends in American life must also be made parallel, ranging from middle-class leisure at the time to feminism, when it comes to the reception of the game, and particularly how Gary Gygax got broadsided by feminism while promoting D&D. The effects and detriments of success must also be weighed, since both men eventually were pushed out of TSR. Then we have the tenure of Williams, the sale to Wizards of the Coast, and then the regular new editions we've come to know, culminating in the current flabby, floppy new edition. Now, to write about all this, I need your support. I have my bibliography and outline, but to get this in front of the hobby in total, I need printing funds and time. This is the way we push back and retake the field that they've left and raise our banner on high. The biggest difference between myself and other writers is that my professional training is in history. You can then expect criticisms of sources, weighing them as they are, endnotes, and a complete bibliography in a single text so you can then judge what I say and check it for yourself. I will not hide sources in a second volume. If what I say is interesting and insightful to others, then I will be satisfied. Thank you for looking at this project, and I hope that it is worthy of your time.
Let's see. There we go. Jeez,
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, I was like,
don't
what's
know.
happening?
I don't know
Gonna
what's
crash.
going on,
Oh
man.
no!
John,
No,
John
like, it wouldn't-
boomering
I-
it up like usual.
No, I clicked on add to stage and it wouldn't do it. So I don't know.
You're just spiritually a boomer when it comes to StreamYard. That's fine.
It's okay. I'm over here
You're
like
younger than me, but you know, it's fine.
I'm over here like modeling like 3D stuff in 3D, and I can't even make like StreamYard work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I like
yeah.
where you're going with this, though. You know, I do think it's unfortunate that we can't just kind of objectively look at history. I mean, this is a problem all throughout human history of hence the need to be sort of critical and analyze sources and things like that. Who's inputting their biases and who's trying to actually be objective. But I do think it's a good thing to have and learn about the history, because I feel like I've dived into the history. You had that thing of like the blood must flow and the feminism that affected Gary Gygax in that was it Europa?
Yeah, I kind of realized something in that I used the phrase broadsided, and I didn't realize I was punning on myself.
Yeah. I got it. That took a second. That's funny. Yeah, you know, like you kind of look at that and you're like, well, hold on. Like everyone is pointed at this quote from Gary, this, you know, as an example, this damn right I'm sexist thing. And we've sort of constructed this whole narrative. And then all it took was me going back and looking at that fanzine and reading the whole thing in context and going, hold on a minute. Like there's a little more context to this than what a lot of people are pushing online. And so, you know, and the sad part is that you kind of bring this to light, and you get a lot of hate, you get a lot of pushback from people that are so bent on pushing their narrative.
Well, people also attach a lot of importance to what was probably kind of like a throwaway line. It's like the equivalent of us like tweeting something, and then all of a sudden, like 40 years later, that's like that's a whole legacy. Just this random tweet that you did that like they take offense to then.
Right, and that's that whole signal versus noise thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Where noise, a bunch of random stuff doesn't actually have any significance, but then when you get the signal, that's actually where you have something significant. Yeah. So if we're talking about that particular instance, well, what's the implication from Gygax's response? He's already been given crap for writing a particular way, and he's been told, oh, you're a bad male chauvinist, pig, sexist, blah, 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 blah. Now, I'll allow with the possibility that Gygax could be considered sexist for the 1970s, but at the same time, let's consider him among other guys who are actually, like, I don't know, sexist in the time period. For whatever reason, I've kind of latched on to using the Dick Cavett show as reference material because I actually happen to enjoy finding old clips of it. And there was one where he had this fella on. I can't remember his name, but he was a comedian. And this guy's whole shtick for that episode was, there can't be an intellectual woman, period. And it was like the 1960s. And
he was right.
Actually,
I mean, what?
Oh, you Dutch bastard. Really? Is that we're doing it? But that's his gig there, where he's trying to say, oh, you know, women can't really think, blah, blah, blah. But if you go into just about any topic, you're going to find women who do that kind of work. And you can then talk about women's education, which up until a certain time period was largely coincidental with their class. They would be getting an education alongside their brother. And because of that, they would actually get kind of education. Unless you're a woman like, say, Abigail Adams, and she had access to her dad's library and was quite a help to her husband, John, leading up to and through the American Revolution into his presidency. But if we talk about the 1970s, what I plan on using is a particular book, and it's called The Politics of Reality. And this is by Marilyn Frye. She's a feminist theorist in the 1970s, and she's teaching in kind of the Michigan area. I'm going to use her just as representative to an extent. She's also an extremist. So, for example, in the very back of this book, and I remember this was in here, but I had to try to find it. And the title is Lesbian Feminism and the Gay Rights Movement, Another View of Male Supremacy and Other Separatism. Bunch of technical terms, don't worry about that. More importantly, what she says in that section is that while it might be natural for the lesbian, which is a woman-loving woman, to feel some concern for the dude who is gay, it's in fact a worse explanation and a worse expression of the patriarchy, because it is dudes doing dudes for dude reasons. But at the same time, it's supposed to be about like liberation, right? People doing their own thing, and she can be useful, but there's only a limit to that use. So I think I'll be talking a little bit about that when it comes to the 70s, because that kind of aggressive attitude is, in fact, what causes Gygax to be set upon.
Yeah.
Because this guy is trying to sell a brand new product. Nobody knows what the hell it is. People barely even know what you're supposed to expect from it. And they have to proselytize at these conventions. They have to try to get the point across, and it only gradually builds up. I have to say a good thing about Peterson for a second. Peterson does point out, and I think quite rightly, in this and then also in Game Wizards, that D&D success is only very gradual. It could have just been a small blip on the map, then disappear. As opposed to, say, Rob Kuntz, who, whenever he talks about D&D, talks about it already being a success. He kind of came onto staff when it was already on that upswing.
Yeah.
Because, Gygax was the first real guy who was getting paid by TSR. Their first real employee wound up being Tim Kask, and then it kind of went off from there. So that's just a little bit about, say, feminism in that time period. What I also want to add, and I wasn't even thinking about this in the last few days, is a section on Appendix N. And for that purpose, I went ahead and ordered Jeff Rowe's books along with Broser just to kind of get a taste of what that is. I've read a fair amount of Appendix N at this stage, but it's also a small amount compared to the entire corpus of that. So, for example, Vic, did I see that you were reading
Paul Anderson, right?
Lines? Paul
Yeah,
Anderson?
I literally started it the other day. I remember reading it when I was younger, but I read it in Dutch, and I was like really young, so it's kind of like a new experience, like reading it in English in the proper language, in the proper context. So yeah.
Right. So you got those books. He's reading those. Arneson's reading those. The whole milieu of that area, you say like Geneva, Twin Cities, is we're reading this stuff. We think it's cool. We also do wargaming. And gradually over time, the Twin Cities winds up being this incredible melting pot and also this experimental area. And in this lab, that's how you get something like D&D. Because Arneson and those guys were kind of over time getting impatient with Avalon Hill's various offerings because they didn't put out too many games per year. So they wanted more. We're going to start mashing the stuff together. We're going to make it into a new form. And one thing I have trouble understanding, but it is a fact, is that Diplomacy was considered a war game by them. And have you guys ever played it?
I've never played Diplomacy.
No.
I know there's lots of. I've kind of skimmed through some of the fanzines of the era of how big it was for play by mail with Diplomacy and stuff like that. It was very popular. I know.
Right, and play by mail is also very important when it comes to getting a lot of the stuff off the ground. So with Diplomacy, it's pre-World War I. Everybody takes on a role. You take on the persona, the mask of whoever that ruler is, and you are sending out messages. You are writing letters as a character, and also you'll be doing some phone calls. So what Peterson, who's a small man, has to try to downplay in his book at the very beginning is whether or not wargaming should be considered role-playing. This is why he focuses on the so-called Rommel syndrome, and why, these guys are kind of getting too enthusiastic about playing Urban Rommel. They're getting too enthusiastic about playing the Germans. John, don't you have some Germans for a World War II war game?
I got to finish painting some Germans up there. Yeah, thank you, Mike, for $5 Australian dollars. Dutch isn't a proper language, Viktor Gorchev, 2020.
I mean, I wouldn't go so far as that, but I do believe that if a book is written in a specific language, then you get the most out of it reading it in the original language.
Yes. We could do another show, and I could talk about the decline of American education since like the 1890s. It's entirely going to revolve around literature, Greek and Latin.
Yeah,
but that's not for today.
I think that's pretty interesting. It kind of tags off of the video I recently did, and I didn't really touch on. I kind of touched on it a little bit in Monday's video, but I didn't go as in depth as I wanted. I wanted the video short. But Ben Milton sort of has that same mentality, and I think we see it throughout the hobby, where like role playing is one thing and wargaming is another.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave the example in the video of like, well, there's Warhammer 40K, and you might be taking on. He kind of has it both ways. I feel like he's kind of mealy mouthed in a lot of his opinions, where he's like, you are playing, sometimes when you're playing a war game, you are playing as this kind of character, you're playing as this general, you're playing as this leader. But I seen him and a lot of people excuse me, sort of talk about like how there was no real role playing in war games, and I think they're sort of extrapolating that to sort of the modern aspect of the game and how people play now, where I don't think people play war games the same way now as they did in the 70s. I think it's a totally different way of playing. But you playing war games more than me. But I don't know if you're a weirdo and you play one way compared to like everyone else, weirdo in a good way. When you play.
I was about to ask.
So I don't know, but it just seems like a lot of the 40K guys, which is kind of what 40K is, sort of like the face of wargaming in a lot of respects. I feel like.
I could talk about 40K. I could talk about Warhammer Fantasy. Let's start with fantasies because I'm wearing the White Dwarf Number 25 shirt. The White Dwarf is, of course, Grom Brindal, and he is basically this really, really old dwarf. And he actually saw the 3 dwarven ancestor gods, and he was a friend of theirs. And he shows up every once in a while to help them in their times of need. And that comes up. That's a cool character. You then want to get the model, and then you want to spout some crap on the tabletop. So, for example, I got a friend who likes to complain, always is trying to be sneaky with certain things. He just so happens to play the rat bastards known as Skaven. Isn't it then funny that I wind up playing dwarfs against him, and I have to keep reminding him of certain rules as he's trying to get away with some stuff? Like, no. Look, if you do this using up half your movement, you then can't go that far. Or, hey, you forgot this rule, blah, 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 blah. So there is a certain aspect of role-playing there. But if we want to say that it's different for the 70s, we could go this particular route. They were in a historical context, which was extremely well written about in the post-World War II period. And if you really want to go crazy, say the Spanish Empire, incredibly well documented, especially the reign of Isabella and Ferdinand. And you can get that information, and then you can then extrapolate a personality based on that. And you also do that for, say, Catherine the Great, George III, if you want to do that kind of time period.
Well, people also forget that there's degrees of role-playing. Just because it's not like Matt Mercer Critical Role stuff, just because it's not like 90s Vampire the Masquerade, that doesn't mean it's not role-playing. It's still role-playing, it's just not as, it's just done differently. It's maybe not as in-depth or whatever.
Right, and in the case with Mercer, it's for the audience. It's not really for the table.
Yeah.
Right? Because
And
the
also-
goal is to get subscribers, make money.
Yeah, and also they forget that they got to build that concept off the backs of their predecessors who might have maybe not gone quite as in depth.
I know Griff doesn't like me, Griffith Morgan, from Secrets of Blackmore, but within the Secrets of Blackmore documentary, you do see them talking about super interesting things. Like you were talking about diplomacy, phone calls, and writing. Like Arne's going to be running a campaign in Europe, like in Napoleonics, and one of the guys, I think it's Greg Spencer, because
Your microphone is cutting out, John.
Oh, is it? Shoot.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Am I okay?
Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
So that's weird. Greg Svensson, who was in his in Arneson's Napoleonics campaign, is like calling into Arneson's house and saying, I want to make this move and this move and this move. I want to write a letter to this person and tell them, to this other player, who's taking on a role of a different leader of a different country. I want to make an alliance with you, And so first of all, we see in that they have an always on game, which to me implies some form of timekeeping. I wonder if it's my internet. My internet's been acting really weird lately. Am I still sounding weird?
No, you're fine right now.
Okay.
All right, because it says TV is underwater.
Yeah.
I'm one of those adults from Peanuts.
Yeah.
So, but he's calling in, he's making his moves, and then they'd meet on the weekend because after all these moves have been made, like maybe there's a conflict that occurs, and we need to meet on Saturday, game all day, and figure out how this battle plays out on the map. So it's like this constant ongoing campaign, and to me, it's like, well, that's role playing, right? Like that's that's it. It's not like you guys said, it's not in the Matt Mercer style, but like Greg Svensson talks about how he did like the budget for his country. I think he was Spain, he said. So he's like, he did the budget for his country, and like where, like that's almost like at a deeper level of role playing than what we see of like, I'm going to do a 2-hour shopping role play, you know, for talking to the they them sex toy vendor in the Radiant Citadel or whatever. So it's like
I've done stuff like that.
Yeah, you know, we got a super chat here of $2 from the Jewish Skeptic. He says 40K got destroyed by going mainstream and lore cells. So.
I gotta say, I'm not a fan of the modern 40K at all. They came out with super duper Space Marines, and all of a sudden the Imperium doesn't seem to be on the brink of destruction. So it feels like, you know, when I was playing, let's see, it was 5th edition 40K at Tau Army, and yeah, naturally, if you're playing Xenos, you're going to complain about new Space Marine book because it was getting a new book. And so that did happen, but it was still 40K. I enjoyed it. Gradually over time, though, I look at the game now and I don't recognize it, which is very strange to me because I don't know if you guys saw me kind of pop off on Twitter, but they have announced that they're going to do a Dawn of War remake or a remaster, where they're going to do the game is going to have updated graphics and everything. And that game is very special to me because not only did it get me through cancer, it introduced me to 40K, which was a great hobby. I enjoyed that. That's how I got into painting. And because I wanted to experience that again, I started a Warhammer Club here in town for the old world. So it's still got this importance to me, but it's a specific version of it in which you do still have the Imperium on the back foot. Things aren't going so well. And you don't have Primarchs prancing around, destroying your entire army by themselves. Yeah. Because I tried like 8th edition 40K, and it's like, all right, I still got some of my models. Let's go try this. Small game. My friend brings like one of the Primarchs. I think it was the Ultramarines guy. And I'm just looking at him like, what's going on here? How do you have them on the field? And then my army just collapses because we're on a small board and I can't stay away from them.
Well, my point with all that, though, is just to bring up, like, you know, in these books, these are my home printed ones, you know, it doesn't say role-playing game on it. It says, you know, it's rules for fantastic medieval war game and campaigns playable with paper, pencil, and miniature figures.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there's like, I feel like the modern person kind of has this idea of what role-playing is. And we pretend like what they were doing in the 70s is different, but it's still... It came out of that. Like this whole concept of role playing came out of that. So it's like, to me, it's obvious. It's obvious, but like I just don't see this like demarcation as like valid in my opinion, I guess.
I think it's also fair because they're thinking in the mode, okay, of that ruler or that character. Then you've got a guy like Arneson who, unfortunately, I've never seen any recording of his dungeon mastering, but with the way they do talk about it in the Blackmore documentary, it's some magical stuff where you actually do get a sense of where you are and what's going on. And that's going to be derived from, you know, the fact that he was a big researcher. He always be looking into stuff, but also he read a lot of Conan and translated all that stuff into the dungeon crawl, which everybody loves, unless you like the shopping episodes, in which case, good for you. Okay. Yeah. You do you.
I just won't be at your game.
I'll come back next week. Okay, I'll just do. I'll send you my shopping list. I'm just gonna go out to like a bar or something. See you next week, guys.
Yeah, I'm not gonna spend my free time role playing shopping with you. I can go shopping for real. So,
right. Yeah. Now, on the subject of wargaming, what I've actually been doing, and Savanwit on the Gilded Server has been a tremendous help with this, is getting a hold of PDFs of various wargaming books that we know that they either looked at or that they played with, and then trying to kind of put them in order and also try to figure out, you know, what exactly was going on at a certain time with how they were doing things. Yeah. When I was trying to read Strategos, oh my God.
I've tried to read it. It's hard.
It is actually kind of rough unless you have a lot of time to sit down and then go through it. So if it's this case that Kriegspiel ran into this problem of, well, the guys didn't really want to read the rule books, so, you know, we came up with a different version of it, which I think became Free Kriegspiel, basically, where you had a lot more variability. Strategos certainly could use that kind of a treatment, I think, because if you go too deep into it, you're going to wind up with, I think, too much detail. It's going to be too hampered by those rules. Although if you are interested in Civil War stuff, his values for infantry fire, and also all these effects on the battlefield. Those are actually derived from Civil War documents. So if you're into that kind of stuff, you look into that. Some wonderful primary material, although it goes too far into it for my taste in a war game. And I think it's kind of why Wesley winds up initially getting a hold of Strategos, and he uses the old card cap bit in the back to get a hold of people, which is a wonderful artifact because I occasionally find some old books with those in the back and I'll buy them. And then he actually finds people in the phone book, Yellow Pages, to then ask, hey, you want to play a war game? Because how do you get a hold of people for this stuff? That's why clubs are so important.
There's no internet, so.
Right. And then you got to come up with him. Strategos Inn, which, as far as I know, I'm not sure if it's actually been published. It kind of floats around. There's a Discord server I'm on where some guys are interested in trying to get a hold of that. And I think they've even gone so far as to try to get a hold of Wesley to purchase a copy of the rules on the basis that, hey, look, we just want to play this by ourselves. We're not going to put it up online or anything like that. Which, if anybody in the chat knows anything better about that and can prove me wrong, just please go ahead. I need that information. Because when I do publish this book, every source is going to be in it. So if I am wrong, you can disprove me. You're not going to have to wait for a second volume to then say, oh, that's what was meant by this. Oh, damn, I already bought 2 books. I can't disprove this now. Dang it. So that's the situation you've got with sources when it comes to Peterson. When it comes to his use of fanzines, I'm only partly there with him on their importance. It certainly got a lot of significance for the reception of the game in that time period. But, I mean, Gygax is kind of going back and forth in the pages of A and E, and also he's fighting off some of these people. But I'm not convinced still that there's all that much significance in it, except for, say, a few that you have to talk about. A and E, the General, Strategic Review, the Dragon, all that jazz, along with some others, because they wind up having the most effect. They got the most readership. So when it comes to, say, the reception of Blackmore, it's kind of taken as representative that it was tepidly received and negatively received because it was negatively received in A and E. But what are the sales figures for it? I mean, they didn't stop making D&D at that stage because, you know, Blackmore was the first real supplement that Tim Kask was forced to work on because they had this giant stack of notes and he had to make something out of it.
Yeah. I think the fanzines are interesting. I think they're good for like what were people thinking about, but it kind of comes back to if you try and cite those as an authoritative source, and I see people spit this at me all the time when I look at something and they're like, well, that's not how we played. It's my 40 years argument, my 50 years argument, you know, where it's like, well, we never played that way, or that's just, we changed that and we changed it for good reason. And then you go and look back at the rules and you're like, well, I think you just didn't understand what you read back then, and you're just sort of stubborn and you're stuck playing, which is fine. Like if you enjoy playing that way, whatever. But you know, you can't come over here and say me like reading from the rules and extrapolating what I think is the correct interpretation of them. If you're going to take that perspective, you can't tell me I'm wrong. So it's like, or like what the intention is, like especially when it's like pretty clear. You know, like sometimes
they do all the time.
The intention seems pretty clear sometimes, and it's like, well, then you look at the fanzine and it's like, well, that's great that these people played that way, but it seems like they misunderstood what was written in the book.
I got a fanzine we can talk about real quick. Oh, hey, look, it's the Crusaders Chronicle.
There you go.
All right, so in this, I actually took up this question of whether or not we should consider this democratization of authority in the D&D game to actually be a thing we should accept. The quick and the dirty is no, because if you've got people who are all coming up with different games and they're all valid, well, nothing's going to be valid because you can't actually move from game to game. This is why standardization was very important with AD&D, because that gives you those tournament modules. And I actually just found an interview from Cass, and he was talking about how much money TSR would make off of those tournaments. It was $2 a guy to get in, and then they would actually have 800 people over the course of a convention play. That's $1,600 in 1977. That's a chunk of change.
Yeah.
So that's kind of awesome. And then it's got that great D&D historian little comic you did. So let me find the syllogism I wrote, because there we go. Okay. So basically what Peterson is saying is this. It's on page 28. So all authors are equal. Okay, A equals B, basically. Then if B, then there are no concrete answers to questions. Okay, because if you've got no real authority, nobody can answer a question. Then if C, everybody's playing a different game. Okay.
Mhm.
Then well, they're not playing different games. It's all D&D. That can't be the case, because either the rules that are printed have the kind of authority to show that you are playing this game, or you are basically playing something else. Now, it has always been the case, guys, that house rules, small tweaks for your local club have been accepted, but wholesale changes. I even talk with some folks on occasion about the game. They're not in my games or anything like that, but they just have a notion of D&D. But they'll actually talk sometimes about doing an entirely different concept, but saying, well, this is going to be a D&D thing, or it's going to be like effectively cyberpunk or something steampunk, when it doesn't actually work for D&D rules unless you specifically come up with something for it. But if you come up with something specifically for it, then it's its own thing, right? Because I think you're gonna have to come up with some special rules for your own thing, right?
Oh yeah.
See?
That's my whole spiel.
There we go.
Yeah.
Even Makuhitl, for example, that
Yeah.
uses 0E. Like I
Yeah.
had to change some things. I had to write new spells. I had to change how the classes work. Like it's a
Yeah.
different game. So that's why
Yeah.
it's like a complete
Right.
game in one book. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to sell this as a supplement. It's just going to
Yeah.
be like its own game that's like loosely based off of 0E or it's compatible with it, but
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I don't call my stuff like D&D. It's just, it's kind of its own thing, but it's inspired by it and it's compatible with it. So yeah.
Yeah, John, did you have the cover for Vic's book available to show on the screen? Because that's
Not-
pretty cool for it.
Which
Uh,
one?
Yeah, which
That
one?
you- the most recent one you've shown.
Streets of Magic?
Yeah.
I can show that.
Oh yeah,
to you.
Vic probably has more than I do. So he
I mean,
has access to.
I assume I have it somewhere.
I hope so. I've seen it.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be pretty screwed if I lost it. Present image file. Now I can just share my screen. Share screen. Window.
But then also real quick on the subject of sources, we also have people who are hoarding this stuff, like
Mhm.
a dragon in a basement on top of moldy paper. They want you to see it.
Well, they want to refute you with it, but they don't share what's there. So it's like it's
That
not
doesn't
very
work.
academic. Like I
It's
can't.
not academic at all. It's like this Luke Hart guy, not quoting, actually attributing to say the Blackmore documentary or to the Bro SR for these concepts like one-to-one time actually being a thing in the hobby now.
Mhm. It's like mainstream now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This always happens though. Anyways, so we got the art up.
There we go. Now, what do you see? Guns, magic, kind of Victorian background. You got yourself a dragon, and there you go. Okay, but it's going to have its own concepts. It's generally in the family of role-playing games,
Mhm.
and you can say, well, it's kind of like this other thing, but it's got these cool different features they can then use. So, you were talking about some kind of magic snuff, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, drug addled wizard, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing something different with the magic system. So
This is why I use like Palladium as an example. It's like I give Kevin Sambida, how you pronounce his last name.
Sambida, yeah, I think.
I give him a lot of credit because it's like he started with this AD&D hack,
Yeah.
and he's like, you know what, this is so different. It's its own thing. It's Palladium
Yeah.
fantasy now. Like I think that's the route that you have to go. Either
Yeah.
make something of it, but don't change almost everything about the game and then tell me you're playing the same game.
Yeah.
And I think that
Right.
you kind of lose that standard, and it's hard to talk objectively about the game. It's even hard to talk about your likes and dislikes. It's just hard to have a good conversation about the game if we have to validate every single like fanzine homebrew hack. It's not helpful, and it's not, in
Yeah.
my opinion, helpful to understanding the historical game. You understand an aspect of it, you understand how people played it differently, but that doesn't help you understand. When I wanted to make White Box, like I had a lot of help from the guys on the server, and we're doing a lot of research, and there's a lot of in the Gilded server on the back end in the supporter section, there was a lot of debate back and forth. We were arguing with each other about like it's got to be interpreted this way, and we're like bringing evidence from the book, from the 3 LBBs of 0E to be like, well, it's got to mean this because this potion of heroism is read this way, so we can imply a lot about fighting capability from the way this magic item is written,
Right.
because that's just how the rules were written back then. And so it's fine to hand wave it and make your own thing, but like if you're actually interested in how to play that game in as it's written, you have to have some sort of objective standard to this.
I feel the same way about the online discussions though, because if you're trying to discuss old school D&D, you need to have like a certain lingua franca, like you need to have a certain baseline, and that's going to be the rules. That's going to be the rules as they were written.
So an external set of facts that you can refer to, so you can actually just go in between. Yeah.
So if I'm talking about 1E, I'm gonna refer to the way 1E was written by Gygax, and I'm not really interested in how you did it at your own kitchen table 40 years ago. But that's the problem. You'll start talking about what the rules are and how they should be interpreted, and then somebody will come in and get mad at you because that's not how they played, and they make this demand of you that you acknowledge that how they played is just as valid. It's like, yeah, you fucking have fun, but I'm trying to talk about the actual rules here, So and that's always really annoying.
Chubby Funster has a good quote. So I'm covering your face. There you go. He has a good point here, and we kind of saw this. Talking. You're trained in history, and we're talking about you're writing a historical book on the history of D&D as your book as an American institution, and like recently we pointed out on the Guild server, I made a YouTube short about it. This whole quote from Gary Gygax of like the secret that we don't tell DMs is that they don't need any rules at all, And we come to find out like that's just a secondhand. Like I heard it from my friend who heard it from his cousin who heard it from so and so. There's no actual attribution to Gary himself. It's all just hearsay that he said this, and that's become like the banner cry for people that want to validate every single homebrew, every single mode of gaming. And look, it's not. I think what people need to understand, and what maybe you're trying to do, and what I'm interested in, is that I'm not trying to say that your game is bad at home, how you play. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm interested in like gaming archaeology, essentially, right? And how people interpreted something is definitely an aspect of that, but also interpreting the source material and what they mean is. Apparently, I'm back underwater.
You were for a little bit, but it's fine now.
I got to get my internet checked out. This is bad. But they use that as a rallying cry, and it's like it's not even attributed to Gary. It's just bad. Right. It's just bad history. It's just bad.
The guy that said that, he put that as like an anecdote in like some kind of zine.
Yeah, he was reviewing another game or something.
And he had heard it from what's his face?
Steve Jackson.
Steve Jackson, like supposedly, but he couldn't even confirm it. I think he like went back and like asked Steve Jackson, and Steve Jackson was like, "Yeah, I actually have no idea if he actually said that." so yeah, but people will like use that as a club to like beat you down when you're hey,
And
I'm
it's
talking about the rules.
And it's like that as you delve into any bit of historical research into the hobby and its origins and its roots. Yeah. And it's like you got to really siphon through all this stuff and check your sources, because it's like referencing issue 23 of Europa zine on page 60, paragraph 4 of Steve Smith from the UK, who the heck is he? Like, we, according to that though, this is the truth. And it's like, I don't know about that.
That's very entertaining, because I had sent you some writing samples, and one of those was me doing that exact thing, except it was a John Adams quote from the Hamilton musical, because I was kind of popping off on it because of its characterization of John Adams for a while. And I had decided I was going to figure out, okay, there's this quote about him calling Hamilton a Creole bastard, okay? Let's get a hold of Cherno's book, and let's figure out where this comes from. So I got that book, I found the page, and then it gives me a reference. I then take that reference, I get another book, and then that reference book has another reference book. And so I get about 3 layers deep until I've spent more on these books than I did getting paid for the article. But I come to the end of the supposedly Yellow Brick Road here, but there's no actual basis. There's no primary source at the end of it. This guy said, well, Adam said this in private. And what I had to do in the article was to then say, look, there's no basis for it. However, plausibly, Adams could have said something like this. But if there's somebody would have said it to him, and his wife, Abigail Adams, and we've got like all their letters because they constantly wrote back and forth. It's not there because you can search for key terms because digital tools are actually kind of cool once in a while. Yeah. And so because of that, there's no there, if I'm going to use that phrase. There's no basis for it. But because people love that musical for dumbass reasons, they will take it as gospel. They'll just take it as a fact. They're not going to look into it. And that's when, I think I say this in the article effectively, entertainment becomes your history. And this is why, to some extent, Plato wanted to get rid of all the bards and all the musicians who were saying bad things about the gods in his cute little utopia that totally spurted out in Syracuse.
But yeah, it's you kind of run into that as you sort of delve into the history of the game, and I don't have it in front of me right now. It's on my bookshelf behind me. It's really unfortunate that like the 50th anniversary book has a lot of this weird stuff at the beginning of it, because I do appreciate a lot of the primary, like Gary wrote this. Like we can move on to this point if you want, because like I'm interested in talking about chainmail a little bit, because you said you that's an important part of the history of this game, the history of this hobby, and it's so funny that there's a lot of people that were so adamant that you don't need that book to play.
Well, are you both educated? Are you both studied?
No,
well, we can't talk about that. Sorry.
Hold on. You guys going to talk about qualifications now. A long time
well,
coming.
Yeah, but do you have a PhD in chainmail? Is what I'm asking.
I can read a fucking book, Vic. Okay, so
well, don't say it to me. I'm not the authority. I'm just following the authority, Dr. Van der Squiff over there.
Yes. Who curled up like a smoky dragon upon his moldy tomes, doesn't share with anybody. So it may be there, it may be not there. It's shrugging your source.
Yeah,
kind of. But no,
the sources show chainmail though. It's just,
right,
exactly.
All of them. But qualifications. Let's talk about this real quick. Look, I got bachelor's degrees in philosophy classics, Latin, and minor in ancient studies. I've got a master's degree in American history with a minor in court history. So it is a wide stretch of stuff. Mega nerd. Like I went to college and I was like, well, my parents want me to do computers. I'll kind of do that. And I originally wanted to do philosophy in the first place anyway, because, I had cancer and I thought about that. I might die. Shit, I got to think about something. Yeah. So I started doing that, but then I realized, wait, they're not paying a fucking dime here. I'm doing scholarships. Screw this. I'm going to do what I want. And ultimately, that's kind of why I'm right here doing this stuff, because I got introduced to D&D through my youth group, and I really enjoyed it. Got into rules interpretations to some extent. And gradually, because I'd read Homer and all these other books, I really enjoyed storytelling itself, like at the table. And then you are delivering a game in a particular way, and it's quite entertaining and fun. Bam. Yeah. But at the same time, if we're doing the scholarship, you've got to latch on to stuff, because just like when you're looting the monasteries during the Renaissance, you have got to say exactly where you found the thing, because otherwise you have no authority, period. You can't just assume it, because it has to lay or be related to something else. So, chainmail, where do you want to start with this one? Is chainmail important because Gygax says it's important? Yes. Is it important because Arneson says it's important? Yes. Should we take Gygax and Arneson to be the authorities on the original D&D? Yes.
Yeah.
So, if they both say it, then we should probably take it really as kind of gospel, if we're going to use that term.
Yeah.
So, poor Himplo. Let's see. Where's Fantasy Campaign? If you'll recall, John, you had mentioned that they were doing budgets, okay, and they had point values for stuff. Arneson says in there that this stuff was based on the values in chainmail, because then you get into the war game stuff, and because of that, you got your figures. Each one's worth like 20 guys, and then you get them onto the field. You have your army. Then you got to try to find a way to win, because you guys are going to have different armies. You're going to focus on different stuff. And that's super cool. That's also kind of why I like playing Warhammer. You can come up with weird armies. and probably lose, but get a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. I think it just comes to people deny chainmail because they've made the way they played the game their personality. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, fantasy combat table, most important table in the entire book.
Yeah.
And the man-to-man. When you look at 0E, you look at the 3 LBBs, and it literally says right here.
It was
Chainmail.
a citation, exciting things.
Chainmail in bold. It's kind of hard to see. Right there. Chainmail.
Well, that doesn't prove anything, though.
You go to the character section, and you have all this fighting capability mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you do with that? And it's like you talk to these people that deny chainmail, and they're like, well, I just ignored that. And it's like, well, why is it there then?
Was it
What's it mean, man?
Yeah. Was it you, John, or somebody on the Guild server? They went through like Greyhawk and all the supplements, and even those to like a degree they mentioned like fighting capability and like all this like very specific chainmail stuff.
Greyhawk still mentions fighting capability and chainmail aspects. So even though it starts to change the game in a fundamental level with a different hit die and damage die, it still references it.
What happened is very simple. People picked up 0E, they started playing it, they didn't get chainmail. They just started filling in the gaps with their own like homebrew stuff, and that's what the game is to them. And for some reason, they just get mad now when people say like, "Well, that's not really how it's supposed to be played." You know, you do you have fun. You know, I'm glad you've had fun for like 55 fucking years or whatever, however old you are. But that's not how it's played. Technically, you're supposed to add chainmail to it, and then for some reason that just insults them. I don't know why it does, but that's just people like that out there, I guess.
Because you're supposed to pussyfoot and not say that somebody is incorrect or wrong,
Yeah.
or what they're saying does not correlate to the facts of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to talk about postmodernism? I kind of hate the topic because people talk about it all the time. But basically, just think about it this way. If you set it up to where everybody gets pissy, okay, you end up having these, let's use the lingo, different discourses, okay? And because there's no real authority based on that, then you have an infinite number of sub-discourses, okay? And because of that, you're not really going to be able to actually come to any real conclusion, let alone organize anything. It's especially caustic because, well, who are you to tell me that I can't do this? Who are you to tell me that I can't, not use, let's say, segments in AD&D? Because I've come across that looking at stuff on, say, Twitter. And it never would cross my mind to skip at least trying the initiative like that. The closest analog to my head I can get that to is, say, something like Pop Fantasy Tactics. But because it's a denial of authority, because it sets it up to where you are not allowed to actually say this is wrong or this is right, it makes a situation where ultimately you can't have a value judgment. And because of that, people want to then push their slop, okay? Say, hey, you should buy this to support me because this such and such thing is my discourse. And because of that, you really want to support me because I have X, Y, and Z characteristics, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I entered into the whole TTRPG Twitter sphere, whatever the hell the term is going to be, I just kind of hung out on different spots and followed different people. But then I gradually noticed that they would kind of flip out over nothing. And a lot of it came down to either thinking somebody was going after them or somebody had set up a different kind of group. And very specifically, someone was trying to go after Yodano, okay? Dragonlance Man.
Yeah.
Partially, I think it was because he set up a little community and somebody else who was in that person's group was also trying to do the same thing. But they absolutely railed and tried to go after him. And then I just threw my hands up and said, I'm done. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. So that wound up kind of pushing me to, okay, we're going to stop following this person, block these people, and I'm just going to curate my D&D feed. And it's a lot cooler now. And because I have been following Yodano, I actually started reading Dragonlance. I've actually met Margaret Weiss. I'm going to go to Gen Con this year, get a copy of the hardback collection of the Dragonlance Chronicles, and get that signed because she's wonderful.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a very I often liken it to the tabletop role playing sphere. To I was very active in libertarian circles and activism for a while, for a number of years, from like Ron Paul's, I think, what was his last run, like 2012? Ron Paul's 2012 till a couple of years ago. And I have to say that the libertarians are less contentious and argumentative with each other than tabletop role-playing people are. Like, I just straight up, I have to just say that, which is wild to me, because we all have that libertarian friend who wants to debate you on everything and argue about everything. Like, it's way more contentious. Everyone,
no chill.
Yeah, no chill at all.
Yeah.
It's incredibly wild to me.
I sort of got an answer for Chubby, by the way, if you want to put it.
Yeah, we could go to this question.
Yeah,
People are so not asking this question snarkily, I promise. But what is the practical utility of establishing who did what back at this time? Why is this a passionate issue? Tell me why you focus on these points.
So for me, okay. So imagine I'm on Twitter. I'm talking about Shadow Dog. Whose creation is more important as far as like the Shadow Dog discussion goes? Kelsey Dion, who created Shadow Dog, or you, Chubby Funster? Like, so what if I'm talking about Shadow Dog and somebody goes like, "Well, Chubby Funster did this in Terra Invictus," and I'm like, "Well, I don't give a shit about that. I care about what Kelsey Dion wrote." Like, like who's more important in the Shadow Dog discussion, you or Kelsey? Like, and I'm not saying that to shit on your stuff. Like, I love your stuff. Obviously, you make awesome stuff, but like that's kind of what it boils down to. Does that make sense?
I think to add to that too, I think it also comes down to if you're interested in how things are played and how they played them, because it's a good counter to them of 40 years guys, right?
Yeah.
That like you want to play a certain way and you want to learn what it's really all about, what it's supposed to be. And I think that coming down to like, well, Arneson did this, like Arneson referencing chainmail in the First Fantasy campaign, and in the history book, 50th anniversary book, there's letters there back and forth between Gary and that book. There's letters back and forth between Gary and Dave, and Dave is like, oh, my modifications to chainmail are very minimal. Like, we just added these aspects and this aspect from outdoor survival, and otherwise it's still just chainmail. And so to me, like, that's important in understanding like a certain mode of play. And I think it helps you understand rules and appreciate games in a deeper way, because you sort of look back and you're like, well, if I need chainmail, I got to reference it. So now I got to go look at it and figure out what this means and what this means. And then all of a sudden things start clicking, at least with the 3 LBBs, where you're like, oh, this game I once thought was this game full of holes that made no sense. Everyone like takes a dump on it and calls it bad, and it's the first version of D&D and people had a lot of fun with it, but it's impossible to play. You hear that shtick all the time. And then you're like, you go and actually read it and you look at these source materials and who did what, and you're like, oh, actually that mentality, that take is 100% incorrect. This is actually a very complete game. And if you implement chainmail, you'll immediately, with just chainmail and the 3 LBBs, for example, based on what Arneson did, you get a proto 1E game. Yeah. So it's sort of like, to me, I think that's important. And for me, like, it helps me to make something, essentially, it's funny. That was the last thing, and then I'll let Dominic say something, because it seems like he wants to as well, and I'll stop blabbing. But it helped me make White Box with the help of a lot of my friends on the server. And which the ironic thing is that it's me only referencing the 3 LEBs and chainmail by the book as best as possible, and through that we've been able to make a game that is unique and new and different from every other 0E clone out there, because it takes these recommendations seriously and who did what seriously, and it makes something unique and different and an experience that people previously could not have or would not have or were discouraged from having. So I think that's why it's important.
Well, it's also just important to be right on the internet. Let's be honest.
That helps too.
Absolutely.
It feels good
Yeah.
to be right on
Yeah.
the internet.
When people are wrong and you can prove them wrong, like that's very, it's very nice.
Pressure and them driven before you.
Especially
Sorry,
when those
that's
people.
not coming in. That's not coming in.
Well, especially when those people set themselves up as expert, as authorities, and then you're like, well, you're actually not because you're completely wrong. I mean,
Right. That's why we got to be careful about some of this stuff, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have first off, who made the thing? That's authoritative. That's what Vic was saying. And then with what John was saying, by taking this stuff seriously, we can sometimes reverse engineer how a game was played, but also by taking it seriously, you can curate and perhaps present that in a better way to then actually express those rules and then get into that game. So I had actually tried Whitebox a little bit when I was going through it to try to figure out how the game would actually play. And I was using the Lost Dungeons of Tonesborg book, and I died very quickly, but it was also very fun because trolls are absolutely terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So use Whitebox as an expression of those rules, which do have a kind of authority. I then get to test them in an old school module and then die hideously because trolls get like 6 attacks and then they start regenerating, which was very funny. So I was actually able to find that response to Gygax here. So it's on page 77. As to chainmail modifications, they were fairly minor. And the big change was laying out the dungeon for explorations and the like combined with a maze, which you have to map as you go along, thus offering the possibility of getting lost. So that's a little bit more about how important chainmail is to these guys because it gives them a way to actually play fantastical stuff along with their other kinds of levels, these layers of the campaign. Grand strategy, you've got like your local county, and then you got your armies clash. You got the individuals going into the dungeon because it's scalable, which is super neat.
Mm-hmm.
So my position on why this stuff matters here, to answer Chubby, is because if we let them get away with it, they then get to abuse the dead. Okay, by letting them put out $100 book, and the first few pages include shitting over Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson's reputation, and not saying anything about that, we'll let them get away with treating them just as a means to their ends, okay, which is to make money. And I actually wrote this on my Substack. It's about why it's wrong to abuse the dead. And basically, I have to give a slight overview of deontology. Real quick, okay, like the Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant, most famous guy from it, talks about the limits of reason, but also why it's still important. What he winds up doing is saving moral realism from David Hume. And he comes up with this notion that what you should do is that same thing which you would at the same time will to be a universal law, okay? And that's the categorical imperative. There are different versions of this. One of them comes down to don't treat somebody merely as a means, but also with respect to their ends, all right? So we also have these phrases in English of somebody is a user, somebody is a tool, somebody is using somebody else as a tool, okay? And that is morally wrong because, well, you don't want yourself to be used as a tool, do you? Because you're a human being, you have ends. And even after somebody passes away, they still can be said to have ends because that reputation affects their family. That reputation affects the truth of the matter of what we're trying to do here. And because of that, we've got an obligation to, 1, address these things, 2, prove them wrong, and then 3, roll some dice and have a good time because this is still about gaming.
Yeah.
Chubby, I hope that answered your point.
So it seems like their end is actually not to make money.
I can't help it that they sucked. I can't help it that they fell on their face. I got the book when it was 50% off back in December. I was going to use it for some Warhammer models, but thank you, John.
Yeah, Chubby, you're wrong. Fucking own.
No, it's a good question. Why does this matter, right? Because you talk about your onus. Okay, what's the ut clause of this? What's your purpose? And that's it.
Yeah.
And really, let's not lie.
Yeah.
Let's have fun playing games and enjoy ourselves.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just you also just have to be honest. Like that. If you're discussing a game, you have to be honest about the game and not try to shoehorn in your own, you know what I mean.
Right. What if somebody took 0E and said we're going to completely change it up everything is going to be covered in, certain colors. They have a certain reference, and now I'm going to use this to promote my particular thing using their product. Okay, using those ideas, and that's the problem with it, which is different from being inspired by a game, coming up with your own rules, but at the same time not shitting on them.
I feel like for me, it's important to be respectful of these men and these designers and women too. People like to think that they're all these sexist evil men, and it's like, I don't
Dude,
know.
a lot of women were for TSR.
Yeah.
A lot of women were in the Blackmore group.
Yeah, they were. Well, the first cleric I think was a woman, or one of the first clerics was a woman at least. A woman is the one who did all the typing and layout for the 3 LBBs.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
anybody in the chat know who Andre Norton is? I haven't read Quack Keep yet, but
I'm not familiar.
Okay, so basically, first D&D book, Andre Norton is a woman. This woman was, in Gary Gygax's game, like 1976, and he let her play in the game. She then wrote Quack Keep and then returned to Quack Keep. So, does a 1970s style sexist allow a woman to do this stuff?
Yeah.
Typically, no. And this is also the case that Darlene, okay, I can't remember her last name off the top of my head, but the woman who did a bunch of artwork for TSR, she did some artwork that's in AD&D, and she did the Greyhawk map, which people adore. TSR initially actually rejected her on the basis of being a woman. Tim Kask talks about this. But Kask, who had editorial independence as the editor of The Dragon, brought her in because he thought her work was great. And then later she wound up going into TSR and doing artwork there, because what you will find is merit wins out with TSR, at least for a lot of the time. And even if there is sexism in TSR, which obviously there is from what I just said, why merit and, dare I say, capitalism win out. It overcomes that stuff because guess what? There's money to be made. There's great artwork to look at. It makes it better.
Yeah. I recently read the Deeds of Paxenarian book series written by a woman. You can very clearly tell she played D&D because the second book is pretty much the Village of Homlet, written in her own style. And but it was one of the best what's the word? Just one of the best representations of the growth of a D&D character, because the first book is basically that character becoming a veteran, as I've said before, fighters are veterans. And then the second book, she becomes a knight, and then she becomes a paladin and all this stuff. And it's one of the best representations of old school D&D that I've read recently. And yeah, that's a woman, so who cares?
Yeah, but I bring that up though too because it's what I wanted to say was, for me, on respecting the dead or not abusing the dead, it's I've built a lot of what I do based on the shoulders of these guys, and the least I could do is be charitable towards them, not take a dump on them, so that I'm not like these people. To me, it is just sort of egregious, and to me, there's an element of don't you have any shame of I'm gonna write all these horrible things about Gary or Dave or any of these people and then sell it and sell their product and make money off of it as I do that. That's just so cynical. That's just again, don't you have any shame? For me, it's I don't want to do that. I'm just only if I'm going to benefit from the work of these people that came before me, I'm not going to, it doesn't mean I can't be critical of them, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to be unfair towards them either, especially when they're dead and they can't defend themselves.
Yeah. A guy that made Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu.
Sandy.
Is that the guy who did Doom? Is that the guy who did Doom? Right?
No.
Really?
He wishes.
He claims he did. I don't know how much he actually did.
Right? Didn't Romero smack him down?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was very, very public and very embarrassing. I would have shut up after that, but I guess he didn't.
Get off Twitter. I'm done, son.
Vic said the thing. What thing did I say? Was it embarrassing? Probably was.
But so to more about your book that you're going to be writing, I looked over what you had sent me earlier, and I like the style and the way it's going. What is there any other topics or points that we've not touched on? So we've touched on like the historicity, where these other clowns get it wrong. We've talked a little bit about chainmail, a little bit about feminism, and how that that affected the initial reaction in the game. What other, is there any other point that you'd like to kind of touch on that you think is kind of lacking, maybe in the discourse with all this?
Earlier I had mentioned Appendix N,
Yeah,
Jennifer's book specifically, and as far as I can tell from what I've read, I'm going to go ahead and look at the stuff again because it's what you have to do. It's research and just read it one time. I've not actually found a good explanation of Appendix N or this corpus of books from this time period. And what's kind of fascinating to me is that in Empire Imagination, Whitwer brings up that Gary Gygax's dad, who was actually rather old when they had him, is the one who brought him home a Conan book. And because of the time period, she's kind of scantily clad on the front. And then he reads this and is just hooked at that stage because Robert E. Howard writes that powerfully.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you've not read him, like, you're missing out. He basically is at the apex of the whole Appendix N thing and also, Pulp Fiction in general. So I had mentioned that I've only read so many so far. I do rather like Elric. 3 Hearts and 3 Lions. I could not put it down, honestly.
Yeah, I just started it.
I'm
it's
getting
great.
certain, references to either the situation, either the lady who turns into a swan, or the knight himself, where I just can't put it down because I'm interested in what's going to happen next. Even if, say from today's perspective, it comes up as a kind of a basic story. But it's a basic, and yet, say John Carter, 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, they're basically isekai, which is an obscenely huge genre in Japan.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the only anime that are coming out happen to be that genre. So by reading that stuff and conveying the sense of these books, I think that we can also show that there's a particular feel to a game of D&D derived from these books. And so when you put all this stuff in a blender, you're going to wind up with something that's closer to how they would have played and how they would have enjoyed the game. Because you should be laughing if your character dies in a horrific way. Because to my mind, quite often, D&D should feel sometimes like Sam Raimi. Okay, like you're doing Evil Dead 2, crazy weird stuff's happening. It's horrific, but it's also really funny. That's why I think that they need to do an adaptation of Skaven Slayer, but Sam Raimi does it, and then the Skaven are all puppets. So you've got Gotrek and Felix just mowing down puppets, blood spraying
I would love
everywhere.
that,
And it's just a hilarious image.
Yeah, but I'm a big William King fan, so I would watch that
He's
immediately.
tremendous, yeah.
Yeah.
So Appendix N. Another thing I would talk about would be the 3rd edition. I've not read it just yet. I've bought the core books because they're actually really cheap anymore. I want to go through those and get a sense of that game to then try to convey in the book about when WotC tried to actually make a new D&D game. It's quite different, and it's also very poorly received at the beginning, to where they had to push out 3.5 real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, 3.5 is when I joined the hobby. I had no frame of reference then. So it winds up being interesting from a couple of different points there.
Yeah.
And then just kind of bring it on to the end from there, because I was also playing World of Warcraft at the time 4th edition came out, and I ran 4th edition.
Same here.
So I got to see all of how those mechanics wound up just affecting the game and all that jazz. Then we go in through 5th edition, initial success, gradually declining product. And then 2019, 2020 stuff gets stupid. And then half a decade later, they screwed it up, and now they're dying.
Yeah. So your point about isekai actually kind of made me think. Like, I'm actually surprised because considering like how many of those old school stories are about like people from the modern age ending up in this fantasy land, like down to fucking the witch, the wardrobe stuff. Like
Lewis,
I'm actually surprised that's not bigger. Like that's not a bigger aspect of D&D. Like I'm actually surprised there aren't rules for like playing like a modern character that ends up in a fantasy world, considering how big that actually was part of like the appendix and.
Well, it's interesting. I know in the Secrets of Blackmoor campaign, they make mention of how he started Blackmoor was like the players were like John Carter essentially. So they were soldiers in our world, and they went through a cave, and when they came out the other end, they were in Blackmoor, and they're like elves and dwarves and things like that. So it's like
gotten really lost really quickly though, because
it's funny because it's like the old D&D cartoon kind of keeps that though. The kids
exactly.
Dude, my son likes that
that's
cartoon.
literally an isekai. Yeah.
I love it that my son likes that cartoon. Thank you, Gygax.
At the time, I thought actually was kind of like silly. Like, no, if I'm gonna like watch like a fantasy thing, I want it to be like full on fantasy. Like, I don't want to just be like modern kids in this fantasy world. Then now thinking back on it, it's like it actually fits like old school D&D a lot better than I thought.
Yeah, my wife and I had a small discussion about whether or not Eric is actually like an upper class Asian kid. Because of how he acts, what references he makes to things, and then like he's a little bitch, so he like runs away. So we think he's like maybe Asian, and he had to flee China, or maybe his parents were like Taiwanese or something else entirely, maybe Japanese refugees. Who knows? But we thought that was interesting. Just when it comes to the makeup of that party, though, Gary Gygax, terrible man, bad sexist, kid, sister. Hank, Asian kid, and then the black chick is the most competent character.
Yeah.
She does the most stuff. And the only reason that Hank can do anything comparable to her is because that stupid bow can do anything.
Yeah.
Right? It almost comes off like, I gotta say it, Daggerheart, where I'm gonna make a net out of my magical arrow and it's gonna save Eric from falling down and crashing into the rocks down below.
Yeah, my daughter loves that show too. I have season 1 on DVD. But it's just funny that it's a Kai thing because it definitely like that's part of the cartoon. Like it does seem like it's something.
Bootleg of it on DVD. It's just atrocious. Somebody recorded off the TV.
Okay.
A friend of mine sent it to me in the mail.
But yeah, it's funny though. It's like there's these little things that like stick through. I almost feel like there's like these vestigial organs all throughout D&D where they go back to the roots of it. And that I think that's another important part of like the history, kind of to Chubby's question again too, which is interesting. It's like, where does this come from and why is it important, like who it came from? It's like, well, it's kind of interesting because then it's fun to look at something and be like, oh, like all this Appendix N stuff, a lot of it is like essentially modern day or people from one era being time warped or dimensionally warped into this new place. And
yeah, even Elric winds up in like World War II Earth somehow, kind of, sort of. Even though in that story, which is rather short, he comes off as being like this sinister character, which is part of why Elric is a great character. And I think Hitler shows up. I can't recall off the top of my head, but you got some weird like moon bridges or something like that. And because of all this strangeness, probably brought out by drugs in the 1960s and 70s, it's that weird fantasy element that we need to have more of. That's why Errol Otis's art on the basic box is phenomenal, because you got a weird color palette, and yet it's still D&D.
Mm-hmm. I actually like Drew Skeptic's comment here. He says, ironically, I think character-driven mangas with little to no overarching plot or meta direction is more like TTRPGs than a story-driven novel. The story is looking back on what you did in a session. I like that too. It's like it seems like that's how they played a lot of games back in the day. And when you again watch the Secrets of Blackmoor documentary, the way they fondly talk about, oh, my character died this way, or like, oh, he did this and he became
they
this.
talk about the Balrog.
Yeah,
right? They come across him and like, oh no, we're gonna die.
Yeah.
If people want to read like a modern take on that very old school isekai D&D stuff, read Forgotten Ruin by the Wargate crew. It's about a group of army rangers ending up in far future like fantasy land, and you can definitely tell that the authors are like fans of old school D&D, and I think people will love it.
Cool.
Yeah. Let me see here.
I've kind of gone through most of the stuff I can bring up right now. Setting up the history of wargaming is going to be, I think, a big project that I have to do for the beginning. There may need to be a preface I will have to write where I have to give the conceptual basis for what I'm doing. Because when I was criticizing Peterson's book, part of what I have brought up is typically when you're going into the beginning of a history book, you talk about like, okay, so this is the approach I'm doing. This is what I think it'll mean. And if I do it right, this is what I think the output will be. But I was going back through one of my graduate books, and the closest thing that I can say it comes out to is an old-fashioned narrative history, because people like that kind of stuff, but also I want it to be readable. I also commit a grave historical sin by using the first person, but that's also my philosophy training, because your ideas are your own, so you are expressing it. It's fine to use the I. One other thing I'm trying to actually kind of base my writing style off of here is actually Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, because it's well-paced. It's also entertaining, because Bertrand Russell gives his opinion on certain guys. So, for example, I mentioned Kant earlier. When it comes to the section on Kant, he's like, this guy is considered the best of the Enlightened philosophers, but I don't buy it. It's kind of that dry British humor, which I rather enjoy.
Yeah,
so
I
that's
like
a little
that
bit about how I'll have to write that as a bit of a preface, then we do an introduction, because I'm setting myself up against Peterson to some degree, kind of contra rigs. I think so, because I don't believe that we should consider Lorraine Williams to be in Gygax's league at all. Although we can probably say that it might in fact be fair play that he was planning on firing her, but she flanked him to then get a hold of the Bloom shares in TSR that push him out. But that's business, unfortunately.
Yeah.
One thing that I've been thinking about kind of within the last 12 hours or so is that we should probably consider the Blooms to be a bigger problem than Williams, because had they not run the company into the ground with self-dealing and also with hiring family members who didn't do anything for TSR, well, the company probably could have done all right. But at the same time, Gary Gygax is in a cocaine-fueled mansion that costs $10,000 a month.
Based? I mean, what?
Okay, well, all right. Sort of yes, but with qualifications. He was recently divorced. This guy is wealthy. His kids are grown up. And he, being a very pious man, Jehovah's Witness, was kind of pushed out of his church as well. And he's in Hollywood in the 1980s. He's gonna party. He's gonna party hard.
Yeah.
So
I probably would have done the same. Let's be honest.
Drugs are bad, okay, but we get it. If you look at the 80s, if you look at Hollywood, that's actually something I've had to look at and change my mind a bit, because I wasn't sure exactly when this alleged drug use began and also when it affected his marriage. Because I think it's fair to say that he goes too far with his wargaming sometimes, and also with his magazine editing and writing and letter writing and all that stuff, because he is a family man. But we should also think of the wife once in a while, which is something that I noticed in Peterson's book. I don't think Mary Jo Gygax shows up in here, let alone under the name Mary Jo Powell. If this guy is saying Gygax is a terrible sexist, what does it say when the author doesn't actually talk about the wife of the guy?
Also,
what's going on here?
How about his daughter and stuff? Gygax has a daughter, right? Yeah, I believe.
Heidi? I think her name's Heidi.
Heidi.
I believe she showed up in some of their promotional materials as well.
Yeah.
And she also played.
Which is something like a sexist wouldn't generally do. Like if they're legit, if they're taking that seriously. That's why I think like the comment that people often.
Okay, so the original box for Battleship, right? You know the picture. You got the dad and the son. They're at the table playing Battleship. What's going on in the kitchen right behind them? The wife is doing dishes and the daughter is doing dishes while they're playing Battleship.
Yeah, good.
And they're like looking at him like smiling and stuff. It's funny.
Good old days. And then I'm gonna get famous, and then 40 years from now, people are like, "Oh, remember when Viktor Gorchev, the legendary Viktor Gorchev, sat on the stream 40 years ago? Yeah, the good old days. Like, that's sexist."
This is video, so they'll hear your tone
exactly,
and then we laugh at it because it's joking.
It's a joke. It's a joke, people.
Oh my god!
It's not how I really think. I think worse, actually. No,
it's like taking like Don Rickles. Seriously. Like, dude, he's just riffing on the audience, okay?
Yeah. Those aren't my real opinions. My real opinions are even worse.
can't say them out loud.
Yeah.
Jewish skeptic says, Gygax was a Jehovah's Witness. My heart aches now. I know, because you're Orthodox. I'm becoming Orthodox. I believe that Gary left the Jehovah's Witness church after a while. He said he got kicked out. And I think we were chatting a while back. The religious aspect, I think, of the creators is also something I think that is important. And I don't really see many people talk about it. Because I know for like, I think Gary sort of became more mainline Protestant after he was kicked out. You or someone was saying he was arguing with his church leaders. Someone was telling me that. And that's
somebody was saying that he
got
only
kicked
really
out.
joined because of his wife.
Yeah.
And then he wasn't actually really like a Jehovah's Witness, and he kept arguing, and that's why he got kicked out. Somebody was saying that.
That could have been during the Satanic Panic because of all the dirty looks that they'd be getting. You know, they show up for church. But Gary Gygax has been on that 60 Minutes interview,
I've seen that one. Yeah,
give him sinister lighting, and they talk nothing but nonsense.
Yeah.
Actually, I think about it. Mr. Welch said that when he was a kid, there was, I think it was the 700 Club. They took a steamroller and they rolled over like that D&D tricycle. that it was awesome because steamroller going over anything's great.
Yeah,
I don't know what the point was, but yeah, I want to watch that again.
That's like the Gygax Wave song that I made, and I have like the samples of like Gary in it, and there's this guy there's a guy talking about how they threw the game pieces into the fire, and they could hear screams come out of the fire.
That song
wow,
is like
if you think it's a spell, why don't you try it and see what happens?
What was that? What was that, Vic?
No, I said that the song is legit a banger, by the way. Like, I love that song.
Yeah. I need to find a way of making it like maybe the new, even though it's like 3 minutes long, making it the new outro.
You just do sample of samples. It's just a really quick version of it. But both Gygax and Arneson were pious men who have these historical, hobbies, and they have these interests. I think Arneson did go on a mission at one point, but it's harder to dig up information about him because, by comparison, he's so private.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's not a biography I can find on him. I can find some relevant information that he gives in some magazines and some interviews.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, after a certain point, you can't really take anything Gygax or Arneson says at face value after Arneson's out of TSR.
Someone in my comment section said something about Arneson and that he was an elder in his church or something, but I don't know what kind of church. I don't know anything about it. He was very private, and I think part of it is that he was booted out of TSR so early, like sort of when they sort of became like rock stars, like with Gary and the mansion and all that stuff in Hollywood. Like he was long gone long before that, so I don't think he had the chance to really even be recognized in the same way Gygax did in that regard. And therefore, for us to kind of know more about him.
Well, this might rub people the wrong way, certain people. But my impression was always that Arneson was more the idea guy and not really the sit down and actually write this out coherently so it can be like a publishable product guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually something. Is your book going to delve into that relationship between Gary and Arneson?
I have to, because the subject demands it. Because as soon as Arneson leaves TSR. They say, well, Gygax pushed him into the mailroom, and then he just kicked him out. Well, in Game Wizards, Peterson brings up that Arneson had 2 products he was supposed to actually deliver, and he hadn't done it yet. And he wanted to work on D&D, but he hadn't done those products yet. So he winds up getting pushed out of TSR. And at that point, he starts going on a, what does he call it? A great war against TSR, in which he tries to use these fanzines, these public events, to then try to make TSR out to be the bad guy. And at the same time, he winds up kind of marketing himself as the real idea guy behind D&D, to where it does get him some work, but consistently he has a problem delivering products. Let's go with a rather straightforward example here. First fantasy campaign, Judges Guild. Was it in 1977? I think it was in 77, or around there. If you go and you look at that book, it does not actually tell you how to play it. I wanted to know what his magic system was. He says there's a magic system, but it's not there. Yeah. I want to know what that was, just because I'm interested in it. But at the same time, I think it proves a couple things. As a book, first off, you need to use chainmail, again, because Arneson said so. But also, he's got a problem where probably because of how he thinks and because his mind goes off in all these different directions. He makes awesome things, but then he can't get them over that finish line. And that's where the editor has to come in, okay? You could have the greatest product in the world, you have the best book in the world, but if you do not have a way to actually put it into the proper form to get in front of people, it is not going to have any value. Nobody's going to know what it is.
I've had to learn that myself. I've had like ideas for games and stories since like I was like a teenager. It took me until like my late 30s to actually like start putting them down to paper and actually, like delivering products to people. Like so, yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of high hopes and ideas and things.
Yeah.
And that would be really cool, but if it's only in my head, it's not really useful to anyone else.
You're gonna forget
Yeah,
it. Write
exactly.
it down.
Yeah. And from hearing like how Dave Arneson ran his games, it seems like it seems like he had a lot of the stuff in his head, and like what his games were, the manual, the rule book was in his head.
Yeah.
And that's all well and fine.
Blackmore documentary.
Yeah, that's well and fine if you're playing in his game and he knows the way he wants to run his game that well and he's consistent and he's doing it, like more power to you. But like as far as marketing that as a product to sell to other people so they can emulate what you're doing, you need to have a bit more than ideas in your head. It's not useful. Like if you can't transmit that idea, like it's only useful for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, you could have a really good philosophy paper. I was actually part of Stance, which is Ball State's philosophy journal. I think they're killing it now. But we had to bring in books. We also had to bring in papers. It was like, okay, this guy says this, but it's not well written. It's not well communicated. I think this is neat. Let's ask this guy to revise and resubmit it. Then maybe we'll actually accept it. But sometimes you just you get garbled nonsense and you can't tell what it means.
Yeah, there's a kernel of potential. There's like a potential here,
Yeah.
but like you can only do so much with potential. And it's not to be like to take a dump on Arneson's legacy or who he was or his ideas or anything like that. Like not at all. It's just the nature of the creative type coming into conflict with the business aspect.
Yeah.
And those things those are two different skill sets, two entirely different skill sets.
Yeah, definitely.
And it explains why Gary was such a slave driver early on, because GSR, very small, they could die almost at any point. Tim Cass talks about this as well. They didn't really pay themselves that much money in the beginning because they were always trying to reinvest it and try to make it bigger. That's why the conventions were so important, until eventually it does wind up blowing up. But that's with AD&D, and to some extent because of the Egbert situation, right? Because that's when the sales really go sky high, because it's on TV, it's in front of people's faces. Ooh, this game is going to make you lose your mind. And Americans went out and bought that.
Yeah.
Chubby, we started his question here. We didn't show this one yet, right?
No, I don't think so.
He has a good question. He says, I would like to know where you guys fall on this issue. If a lot of this game content is out of print or the revenue is going to Wizards of the Coast, the devil, how do you feel about adapting it for modern players? Well, obviously I'm okay with it because that's what I'm doing with Whitebox.
Yeah.
My goal with Whitebox is for it to be the OSC of BX, like the OSC of 0E. Like you want to play 0E, get Whitebox and it will show you how to play 0E. Like that's my goal. So I think it's fine, and I think the fact that that we should do that, especially so that we don't have to give.
Well,
money.
if WotC didn't want that, they shouldn't have done the OGL, and they actually did try to kill it, and it failed. And now it's fair game now, especially since they put it in the Creative Commons.
Kind of forced to. They kind of made it worse for themselves.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not a game designer, so that's all on these guys.
Yeah.
But that's my view on that. I think it's helpful and useful to repackage things, especially because, again, kind of going back to like 0E, and people have this interpretation of it or this view of it that like it's this impossible game, it has it doesn't make any sense, it's a bad game essentially, and you're like, well, actually no, if you actually read it, it makes a lot of sense, and it's actually a very complete game. So
I think if I sat down with Chainmail, learned that, and OD&D through Whitebox, I would have a tremendous time with it because, as I said, my Chainmail review on my Substack, like this feels familiar, right? And not just because you got 4 levels of wizards, because they got that stuff in Warhammer too. morale checks. How many figures count as a thing, and then when you roll to hit, okay, how many do you need to get to kill? And heroes, that being absolutely badass, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But you end up with, we call it hero hammer in the hobby, where you got like the one guy, and he's going to kill the other guy's dragon. It's going to be this epic fight. And sometimes you want to set that stuff up because you might have, say, a magic item. So, for example, the Bretonnians, they can take a magic item where you can't refuse a challenge, which is a duel. So if you have your Super Duke like fly in, and then they've only got like one character, and you do a challenge, that guy can't say no. You've got a lance and a very angry hippogriff. You just murder the guy, and you get a lot of what's called combat resolution. It's like extra points to determine who won the combat, and you can actually go beyond certain limits because of the challenge, because your hippogriff or whatever in this case is just like stomping on the pulped corpse of this poor guy, and his guys are just absolutely losing it because of that.
Yeah, I think people will be surprised if they read Chainmail and they're like, if you actually try to, it's not written very well. It's written with you already having the context that you know what a war game is, and you know.
Yeah, it's written by autistic Minnesotians. Whatever the fuck like, what do you expect? Like,
they expect you to have prior knowledge.
Yeah,
and if
For
you don't
war
have
gamers,
that,
by war gamers.
yeah, you know, and so like
exactly.
If you don't have that prior, if you don't have the effort to try and to obtain that prior knowledge or to make sense of it, then of course Chainmail is going to be obtuse and weird. But
it was designed for the LGTSA. They're already war gamers. They do the stuff like weekly, sometimes even more often than that. They write about it. They'll talk about it. They'll debate rules, which is rather consistent of a theme. Because just bringing back to the Blackmore documentary, Arneson's dad talks about how they would yell at each other for rules interpretations. And that's why a referee or a judge is actually really useful.
Yeah.
It's also why I get called over to Warhammer tables, because I read the stuff. I got it pretty well in mind. So if there's an interpretation that's needed, we'll do it. And then there's minimal friction. You get back to playing the game.
I just don't really get this weird urge that modern D&D people have to like poo-poo like the wargaming origins of D&D, because even to this day, like if you look at 5e, like the combat is just it's just a skirmish game. It's like, you know, it's still a war game. You know, it's like, you know, smaller group versus smaller group for the most part, but it's still a war game at the end of the day when you like engage, when you roll that initiative and you engage in combat. So I don't really get why they just shit on that history of it.
The only thing I can think of is because they are so wrapped up in their own character, they can't think in scale. They can't think in, I have multiple characters. And so because of that, they're not able to express an idea like that.
Yeah.
Jack McCarthy says, agreed. I find Chainmail inscrutable. Old Lords or Wonder and Ruin is much better, but White Box is best. Thank you. Easy to understand.
Yeah. That's another thing which I personally feel it's fine. Like, my personal opinion is if you want to learn BX, you're probably better off in these days reading Old School Essentials than original BX. That's just my personal opinion. And some people get mad at that because, you know, they hold like old school D&D to this certain like, you know, like to a certain level where they like almost worship it. But it's like, I think it's fine to say that, hey, maybe back in those days stuff wasn't written as clearly as it should have been, and then this modern stuff is written a lot more clearly and it's a lot easier to learn.
You went underwater there for a second.
Well, I mean, I am on the sea level. Well, actually, no, I'm in the south of the Netherlands, so I might not be on the sea level, but yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
I got a rule cyclopedia game, and I learned playing BX through Old School Essentials because it's that well presented.
Yeah, exactly.
Where, you know, hey, here are some steps on how to do the game. Sweet. Yeah. What do we need to do in this case? Okay, go to this table, roll this. Oh, I rolled a couple of crab spiders. What's their reaction? Neutral. This actually happened a couple weeks ago. My party is in this hallway. They are doing the Caves of Chaos. And I tell them, all right, so the hobgoblins are up ahead. You know where their door is. But you just see hanging out in front of you, not really being stealthy or anything, a couple of these big crab-like spiders. They're 5 feet big. They're on the walls. They're just looking at you. What do you do? The thief, who just got himself some burning oil, guess what he decided to do? Walk up, chuck it, hits the spider, and of course it ignites, but the spider didn't die. What's the spider do? It goes up, bites him. He fails versus his save against poison, even with the bonus. He dies in like 2 rounds. The entire time he's like stabbing this spider, and his heart is giving out.
That's fun.
It was funny.
Yeah.
Because he's the thief. He dies all the time. That's just how it goes. Because that's why thieves are always dying in Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Also in Conan, because there's that that guy in the Tower of the Elephant, and he dies very quickly because of a spider.
And he's like this master thief, like he's bragging the whole time.
Yeah.
And he's like, "I'll take you, Conan. You can follow me and learn a thing or two."
But I remember saying on a different stream, I remember saying that if you want to learn BX, you're probably better off reading OSE than actual BX at this point. And somebody, I'm not going to say who, somebody also on the stream got mad at me. So, yeah, I don't know.
It's a good starting point.
I think it's fine. Yeah, you know.
I started with OSE. I really enjoyed it. I then got like all their adventures. I got them over here. But then at the same time, I was like, man, this is really cool. Then somebody on the server had recommended Mr. Welch. Like, okay, what's this Vistara stuff? I played that video game. Now I've got like all of this junk on this shelf here just because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for this here, like the Old Lords, it's interesting because it's like, so White Box uses the alternative combat system, and I try to make it scalable from, you know, the adventures going through to like with single adventures to like a 1-to-10 ratio in chainmail. But Alchemic Raker with Old Lords, he kind of keeps it in the chainmail isms, like the 2d6, the d6 dice pool. So you have lots of options there, but the thing is, like, it's all compatible with each other because it's all built off the same thing, but it's presenting it in a way that's like easier to understand because, as Jewish Skeptic says here, sounds like people treat 0E and chainmail rules like there's some esoteric, incomprehensible knowledge that the common man could never decipher. And that's kind of like what Griff was saying to me, where I was talking about 1-to-1 time, how it's there in 0E. 1 adventuring week equals 1 week of game time. And I'm like, he's like, well, you know, these rules are very esoteric and they're very complex to read. And it's like, brother, it says 1 week of actual time equals 1 week of game time. Like, come on.
Well, are you studied?
Yeah, that's what I...
Does 1 week equal 1 week?
1 week equals 1 week. I don't know what that means. This is
7 days.
Well, the esoteric part comes from, like we said, from, you know, it was written with the assumption that you knew what wargaming was and you were like steeped in that culture and in that specific subculture in, like, you know,
Diplomacy,
1970s
Avalon
Twin
Hill.
Cities. Yeah. So if you're not steeped in that, then yeah, some stuff might not make sense immediately. But
it's going to be obtuse. You don't have the context. So
yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the context is invalid or like we don't need it because we found some way of working around it with our homebrew. So
yeah, sometimes you can infer things. Yeah.
I'm sure if you read if in 40 years from now you read 5e, people might not know what the hell it's talking about because it's also steeped in a certain context.
Mm-hmm. And they'll be playing it wrong.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny when I first picked it up. I was looking at the combat rules and like, it's like 2 to 3 pages. What's going on here? Where's my blinking? Oh, that's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Oh, wow.
Oh man, I can't wait until I'm like in my 80s or 90s, and I'm just gonna be like, well, 40 years ago when I ran Curse of Strahd 5e, that's not how we played.
I actually just finished up Rise of the Drow. We're kind of doing our last session tomorrow, and I've actually had a lot of success with that game because I started adding in concepts from the Rule Cyclopedia. Like, I just ported in domains, and they immediately started trying to undermine each other to try to get influence at court. And one of the guys, his whole shtick is he wants to bang the princess, become the king, and then take over everything. So there's sort of a Game of Thrones thing going on in the background, and we're going to adjudicate that tomorrow. But they took off with this concept because I had mentioned, hey, you could buy a barony for 5,000 gold pieces and kind of get yourself a title there. Character buys a title. It's like, all right, guys, you have to refer to him as a baron. And then all the other guys are like, what? This is bullshit. I'm going to buy one now. Right? So kind of like breadcrumbs because they want status. They want titles. Yeah. And that's been there since the beginning. And I think it makes a much better game for it.
That's interesting because it's a 5. Is it a 5e game?
It is. I got the book
Okay.
right here. It's from AEW Games, Rise of the Drow.
Yeah, I seen that.
This is a
I've seen
fantastic
that one,
adventure. I really enjoy it. The Drow do not mess around, and so they will actually kill your characters early on. Because we had it like the first session, a guy had barely even used his character. He came across a trap, and it was an inflict wounds trap, and he didn't save against it. Melted because it's like 3d10 damage at first level.
Yeah.
It's like you got 6 hit points. Bye.
I seen that book. That's interesting though, because I feel like you importing that into 5e, because I feel like a lot of people complain about gold in 5e. They're like, I got all this treasure, I don't know what to do with it. And it's like, well, now you can buy a barony, like.
Yeah, there are a few ways I've actually addressed the gold problem. First off, we do random treasure rolls, so they have an income from that. But then whenever it comes to them trying to find or buy magic items, if you pay extra, it increases your chance of finding that item. And then they've also got a merchant that they've worked with quite a bit to actually try to get that kind of stuff. There's actually a couple of months where he was kidnapped, and because conceptually this thing is actually like an eldritch entity, and it's got all these shops across the universe because it just wants money. And because he was gone in all of my games, roughly kind of like everybody sharing the same universe, he's gone. So you can't buy stuff you're looking for.
Yeah.
But what we would do is I just set the prices rather high to start. If you're trying to find like an uncommon magic item, 500 GP, rare 5,000, very rare 50,000. Okay, there's a lot of variation in the player's handbook and also in the DMG about the prices of that stuff. But you set a little bit higher, they're a little bit more motivated. Then if they pay extra, they want to find the thing. We do a percentile roll to see if they have it, and then if it is there, we then start negotiating back and forth because I like doing merchants. I really do.
Yeah.
Especially this character.
That is one thing I noticed.
Cinematic universe. Yeah.
Well, I ran 5e a fair bit myself, and I ran a bunch of modules, and that's one thing I noticed is that they kind of neglect treasure a lot. Like I ran Curse of Strahd, and my characters, my players got to like around like level 10, 11, and I think they had like 700 gold total, like from treasure, like at the time. That's like nothing. So like the 5e modules really neglect the whole the money aspect.
If I could say one thing in favor of Curse of Strahd doing that, it's because you're trapped in Ravenloft and you can't buy anything.
Yeah, I know.
So
I mean,
you might have a small amount of treasure.
it is basically shitty Eastern Europe, so not having any money makes sense. But
Strahd's a secret communist.
Yeah, but no, but I've also noticed that in other modules, like I don't even know. I think my barbarian and what's it called, Tomb of Annihilation is like level 8 or 9 now, and I think they have maybe like 50 gold on them. so yeah, like it's just something that they really neglect in 5e adventures for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't think they fixed that with the 2024 either.
No,
because Black Lodge did that video about the DMG, but it eventually just became, hey, you could do Axe 2 or Shadow Dark instead.
Yeah.
I remember I got in trouble just thinking about this with 5e and old ways to play and stuff like that. Like I made a response short to that Diana of the Rose chick.
Oh yeah.
And because she did an interview with Crawford at the time when he was still there, and was like, oh, the 2024 DMG is going to have magic item creation. It's going to show you how to like make magic items. And I was like, oh, that's funny. Because the 1E DMG like always have prices and time frames and stuff like that. For making it. It's just funny to me, like how things kind of circle back around. But people kind of look at the old stuff, the old way, and they're like, they kind of poo-poo on it. But then they have they see the same thing presented in a different way, and they're like, oh, wow, yes, this is awesome. I love it. It's like,
this is my company-approved version of the game. I'm saved. I can feel good about myself.
Yeah. It's like, well, there's a book that's been around for 40 years that has these things that you're looking for in it. You could just use it.
I'm also pretty sure that 2014 5e has magic item creation. I might be wrong, but
does it?
I love it when they tell themselves.
Probably at least in one of the supplements.
Sorry, guys. I'm one of those dirty fellows who's willing to look up a rule when we need to try to find it.
Oh, it slows down to take I'm not immersed anymore.
Yeah, well, fuck your immersion. I need to know how the full auto rule works.
Making Strahd was
creating a
worse.
magic item, page 284. Let's take a peek. 23, 24. Uh-oh.
I'd be interested. It might have been that they weren't very detailed rules in the original 5e.
This is not detailed, but it kind of at least gives you a notion on how to do some of this stuff. But it's also very tiny, and it's 5th edition. We know it's really going to say, here are some guidelines. Just make it up, bro.
Yeah.
Because they didn't change that for the 2024 edition, which is incredibly weird because they had the opportunity. They could have put some cool stuff, basically just imported some things from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. The really useful stuff.
Yeah.
The changes to downtime, or say the uses of certain skills, magic item creation. Yeah. Yep, Xanathar's is fantastic because it's actually got the random encounter charts. When I first started playing 5e, I was like,
yeah.
Am I stupid? Can I not find this? But then it's not there.
I remember
it was a problem. I was mad for a long time because of it.
I think Donjon, the website, had like an ability to make. I remember at the time, like when 2014 just came out, they might have had the ability to like make to list. It wasn't a rollable table, but to list creatures by environment type. And I remember I printed one off and had that because it was the closest thing I could get to like a random encounter table.
Yeah,
and because it's just they give you like an example of one, and otherwise they're like, just make them up, bro. And it's like,
right.
Yeah.
That's a general problem I do have even with 2014. So much of it is it's at DM's discretion, but if you don't have any capacity to judge, then how are you going to figure out what you can do or what you cannot do?
There's nothing wrong with saying GM's discretion, but you need to have like other tools. Yeah, but you need to have other tools there to like sort of riff
you're going to give examples, right? They're going to have some.
Oh yeah, no,
like
my
framework that I can then work in to do cool stuff. Right?
My general thing is like per the GM's or per the referee's discretion, for example, and then I give like, like a whole thing. And I have like in Streets of Magic, I have like whole pages that are literally just examples of like how a character gets through combat, how a character like is moving around, how a character is like doing like saving throws. So yeah,
example of play. Here's how a DM might do this. Here's how another DM might do that.
All right. Well, I think we're getting towards the end here. I want to give you a chance to sort of give the final spiel. So you're getting the Kickstarter page set up. I don't think it's ready to go live just yet. Do you have
I thought it was active. Let me try to bring it
I don't have the link to that. I don't think it was.
Oh, sorry. I thought that I sent that to you in the socials page. Let me go ahead and see if I can bring it up.
Just so people can, getting your pre-signups, or pre-launch signups is super important, so people get notified to support it.
Okay. Let's see, promotion. Okay, it does say that it's active. I'll put it in the chat here within StreamYard.
Awesome.
Hopefully it works.
Pre-sign up.
All right, cool.
Let's see. I will.
This thing is going to be very simple compared to other Kickstarters. Really, it is about documentation. It is about interpretation, occasional syllogistic arguments, because that's how I like to do things. And I have a notion about what I want to do for some art. Depending on how the Kickstarter goes, I would actually like to have art at certain points in the book to perhaps represent certain eras of the game. Because I've actually been recently inspired by looking at Dungeon Crawl Classics art. And some of the stuff I just doodled up. So there's the Holmes Dragon is reading the book. And then there's some art there from
this is mine.
John. I didn't do that because it's professional.
Yeah, so
super
I like this. This is like a 0E level. I don't mean that offensively. I mean that like
I know what you mean by it, because it comes from a place of not professionalism. I'm not doing this for money. It's because I had this idea. I was inspired by it. Then I want to do it.
There's a charm to that kind of style, like where it reminds me. It reminds me of like a kid's like a kid in 1980, and he has this notebook, and he like doodled in his adventure, and the kid just had an absolute blast, and he's going to remember that campaign for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
gonna-
to my mind, I like to call it Trapper Keeper style.
Yeah.
It's just doodling, right, in the margins.
You could have put that in AI though, and like, I can't even finish that. I can't even finish that thought.
You could have put it in AI and made it worse. You know?
Yeah,
I drew it on a piece of paper. There it is.
yeah.
So yes, there's the
And,
link
as
to
far
it,
as the
so-
campaign itself is concerned, just trying to have limited goals here. It's really just down to $2,500, which would be 100 copies of the PDF, which I've set at 25 because it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of sources, and some of the stuff I'm going to have to either straight up buy and pray maybe sometime some people who have things in their basement print them so I can purchase that, even if I might in fact think that it's overpriced.
I think that's a very catchy title to an American institution. Like, I like that title. It's good.
Oh, I was going to talk about that at some point. Thank you, Vic. Okay, so it's also a contention of mine that there's nowhere else in the world that this could have become a thing
Yeah,
because of the certain American attitude you have in the Twin Cities towards wargaming. We're going to take diplomacy. We're going to add in Napoleonics. We're going to call each other. We're going to send letters to each other. And then we're going to come to Arneson's room. Wait, what's this castle doing here? Hey, guys, we're going to go down below tonight. Here's what you're going to do. I've got your characters here, and I'm going to be behind this screen. You just, you react to what I say. And because you have this, especially in the post-war American period, you have greater wealth. You've got a rising middle class in America. There's leisure time, and there are leisure activities like wargaming. It then allows, in that milieu, if I can use that word one more time, to do this kind of a thing and then give rise to a big industry. I don't know how big it is anymore. We say $1 billion with role-playing games, but, sure.
yeah. Well, even as a kid, like as a European kid, whenever I heard about Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, it was always a very American thing.
Mhm.
So,
Right, based off of, John Carter doing crazy stuff.
yeah. I mean, obviously it uses European NIF, but as a game, it was very American.
We like to just take things and make them our own.
Yeah.
Kind of like how the French take King Arthur and try to make it, their own.
Yeah.
Taking it from
Yeah.
the English. King Arthur was totally an English king, by the way. Totes.
Yeah, so
With
check
the
out,
French names.
sign up on the pre-launch because if he gets more, it helps to know like when to launch and whatnot as a creator doing this. Vic and I both know this whole pre-launch thing. It could be risky. I'll add the link to your Kickstarter after we close out here. I'll add it to the video description as well.
Sure. Then I got some other appearances coming up next week. I'll be on Dunder Moose's stream
Awesome.
next Tuesday, 9 o'clock.
Nice.
So pay attention to Dunder Moose's socials and all that jazz. Then I'll also be on Dungeons and Dyslexia that Wednesday, the 25th at 10. So also
No,
pay
good
attention
dude.
to him.
Yeah.
Now, most importantly, we're launching July the 1st. The night before, I will be on Alexander McCrease's Axe to Grind talking about this again, and that'll be at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then
Awesome.
in July, I've got Harmony scheduled for the 13th of July. And guys, if you have a show, if you want me on, get a hold of me on Twitter. I'll talk about this again. You can give me different questions. We can look at this from many different angles, because if you've got some great things to bring up, that can then affect how I think about what we're talking about. Because, this is not just me. It's all these books, all these ideas, and then I get to interpret it. And it's also going to be based on what we talk about here.
Definitely. Also, McQuiz, John, me, we haven't been on your show yet. Come on, what's going on?
Yeah.
Hey.
I'm apparently attacking him with the AI because I'm
come on,
mildly,
John. Come on, McQuiz.
mildly disappointed in the art, even though I think everything else is good.
I've interviewed you 5 times. You won't even talk to me once. Come on.
McCrease, please.
Yeah.
No, that was kind of my cry because I was waiting for my Poplar set. Because all the terrible stuff that happened. No, but he was actually great about keeping everybody appraised of what was going on.
Yeah, definitely.
Because of course at that stage it's out of your hands. But I'm stoked to actually have Acts 2 now. I want to go through it. Super excited for the Judge's Journal. And I'm hoping at some point over the next month I can just make a small party, test out the mechanics, everything, and probably get them killed.
So
Nice.
it's good. Ginger Fraser's talking about he's been doing some solo gaming with the abstract rules. So,
Yeah,
that's
I
been
did see
fun.
that. I'll have to look at those rules in the JJ.
People focus a lot on the RPG market as a whole. How much money could be captured by a court? But I focus on what is needed to make enough profit to be worthwhile.
Yeah, no, I do the same thing.
Yeah, we have different mindsets than those
Yeah.
people. We're totally, we have different goals. We don't have share.
We had a Mystery Science Theater moment.
we have different goals. We don't have shareholders breathing down our necks, to make something. So that's always good.
Reach out. No, we're important. He should reach out to us. Come on.
I'm pretty busy though.
If I may, I reached out to Macrease because he and I have actually followed each other on Twitter for a good while, and just said, "Hey, like this is what I'm looking at. This is what I want to do," and we chatted a little bit, and then he'll have me on.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna try to reach out to people when I do Streets of Magic. Finally, I'm very shy and I don't like bothering people, and I don't want to seem like I'm bothering people. Like I'm terrible at promoting myself because I just always feel, like I said, like I'm bothering people. So
how did your people conquer the world, Dutch? Come on, you can do
I don't know.
Come on.
We just did it very politely.
Hey, excuse me, we'd like to have this and this and this.
Yeah.
Well, yes, Japan would like to actually have trade relations with you. Yes.
And I mean, I'm sorry that you're upset, but those cannons behind us, I mean,
just some insurance.
Yeah.
For me, I'll let you go first, Vic. I'll go last. Is there anything you want to push people towards still? Or you've got Streets of Magic coming up. You've been talking. Yeah,
I've got Streets of Magic coming up. That's still gonna take a while, probably, because I still have some stuff to wrap up. I still need to do the Modern Necessity stretch goals, like a couple of them. I still need to finish Blacklight. I'm making good progress though. But yeah, maybe at the end of this year or some early next year, I'm gonna do Streets of Magic. So keep an eye out for that. It's gonna be my white box inspired urban fantasy game, my first standalone game, rather than a supplement for something. If you like playing Shadow Dark and you want to play like a special forces team shooting monsters in the face, check out Blacklight for Shadow Dark. You can just find it on Kickstarter and still back it. I have late pledges on, and that's about it really. The usual spiel.
Yeah, for me, I got white box that I'm going to be working on here. I'm doing a 3D render of what I'm doing. Is I've taken the original thing that I wrote, the original book. I've split it into 3 booklets. So it has all the chain. If you're not familiar, it has all the chainmailisms incorporated into the alternative combat system, as Zero E calls it, or the D20 system we all know and love for combat. But it has all the chainmailisms implemented into it. It's broken up in the same way as Zero E was. Has Volume 1 Heroes, 2 Monsters and Treasure, or Loot as I call it, and then Volume 3 is the Adventuring rules, which has your combat and then wilderness crawling, dungeon crawling rules. It'll come with a DM screen, character sheets, a set of dice, and then a game board that is going to be 16 inches by 17 inches. It'll fit in a box. I have the box sort of rendered here. I can actually I can share where I'm at now too with this. See what I'm doing. Screen. Remove. Here we go. So there'll be a box. I'm still working on texturing the box, but I wanted to give a 3D sort of representation of everything that will be in it. And it's nice because it's just I have the product already and I can just set it up and take a cool picture and,
Yeah, definitely.
Move it around.
I really like how it looks. It looks cool.
So the box I'm still working on. So just keep an eye out for this. I'm going to kickstart this. I just got a quote back from the manufacturer. It seems really doable for me to provide all of this stuff. So I think it'll be fun and cool. So I know I was teasing yellow paper, but I think it's going to be too expensive, and I want to keep the price point reasonable, because my goal with this again is to make it so that you can experience, I guess, my interpretation of Zero E with chainmail in a complete way that's easy to understand. And I've done the heavy lifting for you of trying to interpret these things for you and then re-explain it to you in a way that you can hopefully understand in modern language with the context already given to you, as we've talked about. So I'm going to have to start getting myself out there for interviews and stuff like that soon too, because I want to make sure this is successful.
Do it.
So, but I think that'll do it for this stream here. We're at about 2 hours, which is what we shoot for, which is great. Thank you, Dom, for coming on. I appreciate it. I'm going to be back in your book because I'm interested in learning about the history, and you've like I kind of like scratched the surface, I feel like, and then you've kind of been messaging me in DMs and like I found this and I'm like, that's really cool. You're like go into a deeper level than like I even bothered to go, and I think that's good. I think that's important. So
yeah, I think it's necessary for our goals to I'll say it, retake back the hobby. We have to address all this stuff, and it has to be detailed, and it has to be well sourced.
Yeah. Kind of fight back against the editorializing.
Yeah, from all sides.
I've got a good outro. Let me kind of address that for a second. So objectivity is a permanent question when it comes to professional history. Can you do that? Well, in the 19th century, what they tried to do in order to obtain objectivity was set it up to where they would discover laws of history based on what people did. Well, unfortunately, that gives you the materialist conception of history, which is Marxism, effectively. And let's just say that's more than a little bit of a problem. It's much more modest to say that we are bound by facts, but we also have to interpret because you're going to have gaps there. As I would say in one of my Purdue history classes, I've actually taught for Purdue here in Indiana, is that you talk about something, but you can't get outside the meat suit. So you need to be generous, you need to be modest in whatever you were talking about, because you've got these great historical events, and you are an interpreter to some extent. What does this mean? Because that can change over time, especially when it comes to the usage of certain words. So, for example, I had mentioned kind of at the beginning of this that I had unconsciously made a pun about the word broadside. Well, back in the day, we're talking like nearly 100 years ago, that was a very dirty word, to where if you call a woman a broad, it's something really bad.
Yeah.
But we don't have that context anymore. So you have to reconstruct some of that. You have to reconstruct some of the language, how they actually did wargaming back in the day. And by summoning up those old spirits, you actually show things how they were. And you can say, okay, this is what I think it means today. Because we're constantly reinterpreting something like the American Revolution. One of the biggest debates over the past 60 years or so is whether or not it should be considered revolutionary or not. And I've got a bunch of books about that just like right over here. So being clear about what we mean is very important. And being clear about the evidentiary basis for what we have is essential. And because of that, you wind up with a better book. And it's going to be readable because of that. And more importantly, if something is messed up, because it is clear and well-sourced, it can be corrected.
Yeah.
Because we are aiming at some kind of truth.
Sure.
Yeah, and since you're giving all your sources, somebody might be able to dig into them, and it's like, hey, actually, you read this wrong. This is how it is, and and you can't really refute that then at that point.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
Yeah,
but they can't refute it. They can't refute it the other way either, though. So
yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah,
right. It allows us to be wrong if we say that there's actually something true about it.
And and me personally, when I read history, I would like it to be free of like our current age bias. Like when I read World War II history, I don't want it to be, from the bias that we currently have about like warfare and stuff like that. Because it's like I was talking about this with my dad just yesterday. It's like the first day of D-Day, I think like 10,000 French citizens died from Allied bombings. Obviously, that wouldn't fly in this modern age, but back then that was just like kind of like that was just the reality of warfare. You didn't have like precision bombing and then like all that stuff. So,
right.
Got a super chat from Planet Tobor real quick. He says for $10, thank you, sir. Appreciate the show and appreciate what Dom is doing. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Gordon Wood, who is the most prominent American historian living, actually has a rather short book about the revolution. It's like less than 200 pages, but it's also a fantastic book. In it, he tries to address that, well, the modern conception of history and how it's being done currently with what people are writing doesn't show much about the past, but rather it shows what the positions, especially political positions, are of the writers. That's not it. It's about the subject.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we'll end the show here. Thank you, Dom, for coming on, and I wish you luck on your Kickstarter campaign for this book. And it seems like people are interested in what I'm interested in. I think it's important.
Yeah, definitely.
We need to push back on some of this stuff. Not to be like a cringe culture warrior, but just for the sake of truth and objectivity and being honest, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate that. Thank you, chat. Good questions. Always enjoy you guys in chat, you regulars. I appreciate you guys a lot. And thank you, Vic. Hanging out later in Dutch.
Yeah, it's like 11 p.m. here.
No, it's not too late. You still go to bed, but you probably won't though.
No. Thinking.
But thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you guys on the next stream. Peace out.
Later.
Dag iedereen.